He thought turning her away would be just another routine decision, another small act of control that kept his world perfectly ordered. But in less than a minute, that decision would begin to unravel everything he believed about power and status. The grand lobby of the Halston Grand Hotel shimmered under warm golden chandeliers, polished marble floors reflecting the quiet confidence of guests dressed in tailored suits and designer gowns, the kind of place where presence alone seemed to demand a certain level of wealth, a certain kind of belonging. And then there was Evelyn Carter. She stepped through the revolving doors without hesitation, her soft gray dress simple, unbranded, falling just below her knees, her shoes practical, her posture calm but unassuming, as if she had no need to impress anyone in the room. For a brief second, no one noticed her, and then Daniel Brooks did. Standing near the entrance with a tablet in hand, the hotel's front-of-house manager had built his reputation on reading people within seconds, deciding who mattered and who didn't before they ever spoke a word. His eyes moved over Evelyn quickly, efficiently, taking in every detail, the absence of luxury labels, the lack of visible status, and in that instant, his conclusion was already made. She didn't belong. He stepped forward with a polite smile that never reached his eyes, positioning himself just enough to block her path, without making it obvious. "Good evening," he said smoothly, voice low but firm. "This is a private event." Around them, a few nearby guests slowed their conversations, their attention drawn by the subtle tension in his tone. Evelyn paused, her gaze lifting to meet his, steady and unreadable, as if she had heard those words before and already knew how the moment would unfold. "I understand," she replied quietly, her voice calm, almost gentle, but there was something in it that didn't quite match the simplicity of her appearance. Daniel tilted his head slightly, maintaining control of the interaction, lowering his voice just enough to sound courteous while still making his message clear. "Then you also understand that entry is restricted to registered guests only." A faint murmur rippled through the space, the kind of quiet curiosity that spreads when something feels just slightly out of place. Evelyn didn't argue. She didn't step back. She simply stood there, her hands relaxed at her sides, her expression composed in a way that felt almost deliberate, as if she were waiting for something unseen. Daniel's smile tightened just a fraction. He was used to resistance, to awkward apologies, to people realizing they had made a mistake. But this silence was different. It lingered. It stretched. And for the first time, there was a flicker, just a flicker, of uncertainty behind his practiced confidence. The room seemed to hold its breath, the low hum of conversation fading into something thinner, sharper, as if the entire space had shifted its attention to a moment no one could yet explain. Evelyn's eyes remained steady, unwavering, and somewhere deep in the distance, just beyond the glass doors, the faint sound of a car engine echoed against the marble entrance, quiet at first, almost unnoticeable, but enough to signal that something was about to change. The sound grew louder, no longer distant, but unmistakably present, the low, controlled hum of a high-end engine gliding across the pavement outside the hotel entrance, and slowly, conversations began to falter as heads turned toward the glass doors, curiosity replacing indifference in a matter of seconds. Daniel Brooks noticed it too, though he refused to let it break his composure, his attention still fixed on Evelyn, as if maintaining control over her presence would somehow maintain control over the entire room. "I am going to have to ask you to step aside," he said, this time with less courtesy and more authority, his voice firm enough to signal that the interaction was no longer optional. A security guard near the entrance shifted slightly, not yet intervening, but ready, watching for Daniel's cue. Evelyn did not move. Her posture remained relaxed, her expression unchanged, but there was something subtle in her stillness, something that made the moment feel less like defiance and more like certainty. Outside, the vehicle came to a smooth stop, its glossy black surface reflecting the city lights like liquid glass, and for a brief second, the entire lobby seemed to lean toward the entrance without realizing it. The revolving doors turned slowly, deliberately, and a man in a sharply tailored charcoal suit stepped inside, his presence immediate, not loud, not exaggerated, but undeniable. Conversations stopped completely now. The air shifted. Even the staff straightened instinctively. Daniel's attention flickered, just for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, something inside him tightened. The man's eyes scanned the room with calm precision before landing on Evelyn, and what happened next was not dramatic in the way people expect. There was no raised voice, no grand announcement, only a subtle but unmistakable change in posture as he walked directly toward her, ignoring everyone else. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone respectful, measured, "we have been waiting for you upstairs." The words did not echo loudly, but they carried, cutting cleanly through the silence that had settled over the room. Daniel felt it before he fully understood it. The shift, the realization beginning to form like a crack spreading beneath the surface. Guests who had been watching now exchanged glances, whispers rising, uncertain at first, then sharper, more focused. The name lingered in the air, heavier than it should have been, as if it carried weight that only a few people in the room recognized immediately. Evelyn finally moved, not hurried, not flustered, simply turning her head slightly toward the man who had addressed her, acknowledging him with a small nod that suggested familiarity, not surprise. Then, and only then, she looked back at Daniel. It was not anger in her eyes, not even satisfaction, just a quiet awareness, as if she had seen this moment long before it happened. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. His rehearsed authority, his practiced confidence, all of it seemed to hesitate at once, caught between what he believed and what was now unfolding in front of him. Around them, the room remained frozen, suspended in that fragile space between assumption and truth, where everything that had just happened was beginning to rearrange itself into something no one had expected. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like a room adjusting to a truth it was not prepared to face. And Daniel Brooks felt it in the way the air seemed heavier, in the way eyes were no longer glancing past Evelyn, but locking onto her with a new kind of attention that he could not control. The man in the charcoal suit stood beside her now, not in front, not leading, but positioned with quiet deference, the kind that only appeared when hierarchy had already been established long before anyone else realized it. "They are ready for you," he added, his voice calm, almost understated, as if this moment was simply a delayed formality rather than a revelation. Evelyn gave a small nod, the movement effortless, and for a second, it was as if everything around her moved just a fraction slower, as if the room itself was recalibrating to her presence. Daniel's throat tightened. He had managed high-profile events, handled celebrities, executives, investors, people whose names carried weight. But this was different, because he had missed it completely. He had not just misjudged her, he had dismissed her. And now that mistake was unfolding in real time, in front of everyone who had witnessed it. A woman near the entrance leaned toward her companion, whispering something urgent, her eyes wide, while another guest subtly checked their phone, as if searching for confirmation of a name that suddenly felt important. The security guard who had been ready to step forward now stood still, his posture shifting from enforcement to uncertainty. Daniel tried to recover, tried to reassemble the polished professionalism that had always defined him. "Miss Carter," he began, the name unfamiliar on his tongue despite having just heard it. "If there has been any misunderstanding, I would be happy to personally escort you." But the words faltered, not because he did not know what to say, but because he could feel, unmistakably, that he no longer controlled the situation. Evelyn turned fully toward him now, her expression composed, her gaze steady, and in that moment, there was no tension in her posture, no urgency, only clarity. "There was no misunderstanding," she said softly, her voice even, carrying just enough to reach him without needing to rise. The simplicity of her tone made the words land harder than any confrontation could have. Around them, the room remained suspended, every movement slowed, every whisper sharpened. Daniel felt heat rise behind his collar, a rare, unfamiliar sensation, as the weight of what he had done settled into place. He had made a judgment in seconds, based on appearance, based on assumption, and now that judgment stood exposed in front of a room that was beginning to understand exactly what had happened. Evelyn did not step closer, did not press the moment. She simply held his gaze for a fraction longer, long enough for the realization to fully take root, before turning back toward the man waiting beside her. As she began to walk toward the elevators, The subtle rhythm of her footsteps echoed against the marble floor, measured, unhurried, and with each step, the space she left behind seemed to fill with something unspoken, something that lingered in the expressions of those watching. Daniel remained where he was, motionless, his tablet forgotten in his hand, as the elevator doors opened in the distance, polished steel reflecting the quiet shift that had just rewritten the entire room. The elevator doors closed with a soft, controlled motion, sealing Evelyn Carter away from the tension she had left behind. But the silence she created did not disappear with her. It stayed, stretched across the marble floor, pressing into every corner of the lobby, as if the room itself was trying to process what had just happened. Daniel Brooks stood frozen for a moment longer, his reflection faintly visible in the polished surface of a nearby column, and for the first time in years, he did not recognize the confidence he usually saw there. Around him, the whispers began, low at first, then building, not loud enough to disrupt the setting, but sharp enough to cut through his composure. "Did he just turn her away?" someone murmured. That was Evelyn Carter. Another voice responded, quieter, but far more certain. A guest near the center of the room pulled out a phone, scrolling quickly, eyes widening as recognition set in, and that was when the shift became irreversible. Daniel felt it in the way people no longer looked at him with casual respect, but with something else, something closer to evaluation, as if he had become the subject of the very judgment he had so confidently delivered minutes earlier. The security guard avoided his gaze now, adjusting his stance, uncertain, while a junior staff member stepped closer, hesitating before speaking in a lowered voice. "Sir, do you want me to notify upstairs?" The question lingered between them, heavy with implication. Daniel inhaled slowly, trying to regain control, but the structure he relied on, the hierarchy, the predictability, it all felt unstable now. Upstairs. The word alone carried weight. It meant she had not just been allowed in, she had been expected, waiting for her. The realization pressed deeper. This was not a guest trying to enter. This was someone the event had been built around. His grip tightened slightly around the tablet in his hand, the edges pressing into his palm, grounding him just enough to act. "Yes," he said finally, his voice measured, but lacking the certainty it once held. "Inform them that I will be coming up." The staff member nodded quickly and moved away, while Daniel adjusted his jacket, smoothing it with deliberate precision, as if restoring the fabric could somehow restore his authority. But the room had already shifted. As he moved toward the elevator, the path did not feel the same. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but people stepped aside differently now, not out of routine courtesy, but with a quiet awareness, as if they were watching something unfold that they would later talk about. The elevator doors opened again with a soft chime, and as Daniel stepped inside, he caught one last reflection of the lobby behind him, the golden light, the polished marble, the guests who had witnessed everything, and for the first time, that space did not feel like something he controlled. It felt like something that had judged him. The doors closed, and the ascent began, smooth and silent, the numbers lighting up one by one, each floor, bringing him closer to a confrontation he had not prepared for, not because he lacked experience, but because this situation did not follow the rules he had always trusted. Somewhere above, beyond those doors, Evelyn Carter was no longer the woman he had denied. She was the woman everyone else had been waiting for, and Daniel Brooks was about to step into a room where his authority meant nothing at all. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor with a quiet chime, but the atmosphere waiting on the other side was anything but quiet. It was focused, anticipatory, the kind of energy that gathers when something important is about to begin, and Daniel Brooks felt it immediately as he stepped out onto the polished hallway lined with soft lighting and muted conversations. At the far end, the double doors to the grand ballroom stood open, revealing a room filled with the city's most influential figures, investors, executives, and decision-makers, all gathered not just for an event, but for something far more significant. Inside, the lighting was warmer, the air heavier with expectation, and at the center of it all stood Evelyn Carter. She was no longer near the edges of the room, no longer overlooked. She stood where the attention naturally converged, surrounded not by noise, but by respect. A small group had formed around her, listening, nodding, waiting for her words as if they carried weight beyond the moment. The man in the charcoal suit stood slightly behind her, attentive, while another executive leaned in, speaking with careful consideration. Daniel slowed his steps without realizing it, the scene unfolding in front of him, dismantling every assumption he had made downstairs. This was not a guest being accommodated. This was the person the room had been built around. A voice near him broke the stillness, low but clear enough to carry meaning. "That is her," someone said. "She finalized the acquisition this morning." Another voice followed, quieter but sharper. "She owns the controlling interest now." The words settled into place with quiet precision, and Daniel felt the full weight of them. Ownership, control, authority. Not implied, not symbolic, but real. The structure he had relied on, the hierarchy he believed he understood, had shifted without him even realizing it. Evelyn turned slightly as someone addressed her from the side, her expression calm, composed, her posture effortless, as if she had always belonged exactly where she stood. There was no need for display, no need for validation. Her presence alone had already established everything that mattered. Daniel adjusted his jacket again, but this time the movement felt unnecessary, almost hollow, as he stepped further into the room. A few heads turned toward him, not with admiration, but with recognition of context, as if they understood his role in what had just unfolded. He approached carefully, the distance between them closing slower than he expected, each step carrying a quiet awareness of what he was about to face. Evelyn noticed him before he spoke. Her eyes met his briefly, steady, composed, and in that single glance, there was no hostility, no triumph, only clarity, as if the moment required nothing more than acknowledgement. Daniel stopped a few feet away, the words he had prepared dissolving under the weight of reality. "Ms. Carter," he said finally, his voice controlled but softer than before, "I owe you an apology." The surrounding conversation faded just enough for the moment to exist on its own. Evelyn regarded him for a second, not evaluating, not judging, simply observing, and then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You made a decision," she said, her tone even, "based on what you thought you saw." The simplicity of the statement landed with quiet force, not accusatory, not dramatic, but undeniable. Daniel felt it settle, deeper than any reprimand could have. Around them, the room remained attentive, not intruding, but aware, as if witnessing something more important than the event itself. Evelyn turned slightly back toward the group waiting for her, the conversation ready to resume, the moment already moving forward, and Daniel stood there, understanding, finally, that authority had never been about who he chose to let in, but about recognizing who never needed his permission to begin with. The conversation resumed around Evelyn Carter as if nothing had been interrupted, but the shift in the room was permanent, subtle yet undeniable, like a current beneath still water that changed the direction of everything without drawing attention to itself. Glasses clinked softly, low voices returned, but now they carried a different tone, one shaped by awareness, by the quiet understanding of who held real influence in the room. Evelyn spoke with calm precision, her words measured, not rushed, each sentence carrying weight not because of volume, but because of certainty. Across from her, a senior partner leaned forward slightly, listening with full attention, while another executive nodded, taking mental notes, the kind of focus reserved only for those whose decisions shaped outcomes beyond the room itself. Daniel Brooks remained where he stood for a moment longer, just outside the circle, aware that stepping in too quickly would only emphasize the distance that had already been revealed. He watched as Evelyn responded to a question about the transition of ownership, her explanation clear, composed, and quietly authoritative. "Continuity matters," she said, her tone steady. "But so does perspective. The structure will remain, but the direction will evolve." There was no need for emphasis, no need for elaboration. The room understood. A soft murmur of agreement followed, not loud, but unified, as if the decision had already been accepted before it was fully spoken. Daniel finally moved, stepping closer, but this time without the assumption of control, without the instinct to lead. He waited, just at the edge of the conversation, until there was a natural pause, until the space allowed him to be acknowledged rather than imposed. One of the attendees glanced toward him, then back to Evelyn, a silent cue that shifted the moment. Evelyn turned again, her gaze meeting his with the same calm clarity as before. There was no tension in her expression, no trace of the earlier exchange, only presence. "Is there something you need, Mr. Brooks?" she asked, her voice even, professional, but now it carried something else, not authority asserted, but authority recognized. The use of his name, simple and direct, grounded the moment in a way that left no room for pretense. Daniel nodded slightly, aware of every pair of eyes that might be observing without appearing to do so. "I wanted to confirm that everything you require for this evening has been arranged," he said, choosing his words carefully, his tone respectful, stripped of the confidence that once bordered on assumption. Evelyn studied him for a brief second, not searching, not questioning, simply seeing him as he was in that moment. "Everything is in place," she replied. Then after a short pause, added, "Thank you." The words were simple, but they were not dismissive. They were complete, closing the distance between confrontation and resolution without revisiting the past. Daniel inclined his head slightly, accepting the response, and for the first time since the evening began, he understood his role differently. Not as a gatekeeper, not as someone who decided who belonged, but as someone responsible for recognizing it. Around them, the conversation continued, flowing naturally, but the lesson remained, quiet and unspoken, carried in the way the room moved, in the way attention followed Evelyn without effort, in the way authority revealed itself without announcement. And as Daniel stepped back, returning to his position not as the center, but as part of the structure, he realized that respect had never been something he could assign. It was something he had to learn to see. The evening moved forward, but something fundamental had shifted in the way the room carried itself, as if an invisible line had been redrawn and everyone, whether they realized it or not, had adjusted accordingly. Conversations no longer drifted aimlessly, they orbited with intention, gravitating toward Evelyn Carter with a quiet inevitability that required no announcement. She did not raise her voice, did not command attention, yet attention found her, settled around her, held there by the clarity of her presence. A senior investor stepped closer, his tone respectful, almost careful. "We were not expecting the transition to happen this quickly," he said. Evelyn listened without interruption, her posture relaxed, her expression thoughtful. "Neither was I," she replied, her voice calm, steady. "But timing is rarely about comfort. It is about readiness." The words landed softly, but they carried weight, the kind that reshaped understanding rather than challenged it. Around them, a few heads nodded, not out of agreement alone, but recognition. Daniel Brooks observed from a distance now, no longer attempting to insert himself, but learning, watching the subtle dynamics he had once believed he controlled. He noticed how people leaned in when she spoke, how they paused before responding, how even disagreement was framed with respect. This was not authority imposed. This was authority earned, and more importantly, recognized. A woman in a navy suit approached Evelyn with a tablet, speaking quietly. "The board is ready whenever you are." Evelyn glanced at the screen briefly, then looked back up, her expression unchanged. "Give them 5 minutes," she said, her tone even, not rushed, not delayed, simply certain. The woman nodded immediately and stepped away without question. Daniel felt that moment more than any other. There had been no negotiation, no justification, just a decision that was accepted as final the moment it was spoken. Nearby, 2 guests exchanged a glance, one whispering, "She is exactly as they described." The other responded, "No, she is more than that." The words were quiet, almost lost in the room, but Daniel heard them, and they settled deeper than anything else he had witnessed that evening. He adjusted his stance, no longer out of habit, but out of awareness, understanding now that presence was not about appearance, not about projection, but about consistency between who someone was and how they moved through the world. Evelyn shifted slightly, turning toward the center of the room as the energy subtly reoriented around her. There was no signal, no announcement, yet people began to gather, conversations narrowing, attention aligning. The man in the charcoal suit stepped closer, not to guide, but to accompany, his position reinforcing what the room already understood. Daniel took a slow breath, the realization settling fully into place. Everything he had relied on, the quick judgments, the surface-level assessments, They had failed him in the moment it mattered most. And now, standing in a room where true influence revealed itself without effort, he saw clearly what he had missed. Evelyn Carter did not need to prove who she was. The room had already done that for her. And as she prepared to step forward, to address the people who had been waiting, the silence that formed was not empty. It was expectant, filled with the kind of respect that could not be demanded, only earned, and Daniel Brooks stood within it, no longer certain of anything except one truth he could not ignore. The room settled into a stillness that did not feel forced, but chosen, as if every person present understood that something more important than conversation was about to take place. And when Evelyn Carter stepped forward, the shift was immediate, not dramatic, but absolute. She did not rush, did not gesture for attention, yet attention followed her without resistance. Drawing inward like gravity had quietly changed direction. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected off the marble floor as she reached the center of the room, and for a brief moment, no one spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full, expectant, aware. Evelyn looked across the room, not scanning, not searching, but seeing, her gaze steady, her posture composed, as if she had stood in moments like this long before anyone else realized it mattered. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice calm, clear, carrying effortlessly without needing to rise. There was no rehearsed performance in her tone, no attempt to impress, only clarity. "I know tonight came together quickly," she continued, "and I also know that change, especially unexpected change, can feel uncertain." A few people shifted slightly, not in discomfort, but in attention, leaning into her words. "But uncertainty is not the problem," she said, pausing just long enough for the thought to settle. "Misjudgment is." The word lingered in the air, subtle but precise, and though she did not look directly at him, Daniel Brooks felt it land with unmistakable weight. Around the room, expressions remained composed, but something deeper had aligned, as if everyone understood that her words were not just about business, but about something more fundamental. Evelyn continued, her tone steady, unhurried. "What we build, what we invest in, what we protect, it is never just about structure or numbers. It is about perception. And perception, when left unchecked, becomes assumption." The room remained silent, but not passive. Every person present was engaged, present, aware. Daniel stood at the edge of that awareness, no longer invisible, but no longer central, simply part of the moment as it unfolded. Evelyn's gaze moved across the room again, inclusive, not selective. "Tonight is not about ownership," she said. "It is about direction. And direction requires clarity, not just in strategy, but in how we choose to see each other." The words were not sharp, not accusatory, but they carried a quiet authority that did not allow them to be ignored. A senior partner nodded slowly. Another executive adjusted their stance, as if something internal had shifted into place. Evelyn paused once more, letting the silence return, not as a gap, but as a conclusion. Then she added, softer this time, "Because the cost of getting it wrong is never as small as it seems in the moment." The statement settled over the room like a final note, not loud, not dramatic, but complete. No one rushed to speak. No one interrupted. The silence that followed was not uncertainty. It was understanding. And within that stillness, Daniel Brooks stood, fully aware now, that the moment he had once controlled had become the moment that defined him, not in front of the room, but within himself. The silence did not break with applause. It unfolded slowly, like a realization settling into every corner of the room, deeper than sound, more lasting than any reaction that could have filled the space. People did not rush forward. They did not interrupt. They simply stood there, absorbing what had just been said, each person processing it in their own way, but all arriving at the same quiet understanding. Evelyn Carter did not wait for acknowledgement. She did not seek validation. She simply stepped back from the center, her role in the moment. Complete, her presence no longer needing to explain itself. Conversations began again, but they were different now, more measured, more aware, as if everyone had become slightly more careful with their words, their assumptions, their judgments. A senior executive approached her, extending a hand with genuine respect, not obligation. "That was exactly what this room needed to hear," he said. Evelyn accepted the gesture with a small nod, her expression unchanged, grounded, as if the weight of the moment had never required her to shift. Across the room, Daniel Brooks remained still for a moment longer, watching as the space he once managed so effortlessly now operated on a level he had only just begun to understand. The details he used to rely on, clothing, posture, first impressions, they all felt incomplete now, like fragments of a system that could no longer hold together under closer scrutiny. He moved slowly, not toward Evelyn this time, but toward the entrance of the ballroom, where the open doors revealed the quiet hallway beyond, a contrast to the energy behind him. Each step felt deliberate, not out of hesitation, but reflection, as if he was walking through the space with a different awareness than before. A staff member passed by, offering a polite nod, and Daniel returned it, not automatically, but intentionally, recognizing something he had overlooked countless times before. At the doorway, he paused, glancing back one last time. Evelyn stood among the guests, not elevated, not isolated, but integrated, her presence shaping the room without demanding it. There was no spectacle, no grand display, just a quiet authority that did not need to prove itself. Daniel exhaled slowly, the tension he had carried earlier no longer sharp, but replaced with something steadier, something more difficult to ignore. He had not been corrected in front of the room. He had not been challenged publicly, yet the lesson had been clearer than any confrontation could have made it. It had unfolded in silence, in presence, in the undeniable contrast between assumption and reality. He turned away from the ballroom, stepping into the hallway where the lighting softened and the noise faded, leaving only the echo of what had taken place. And in that quieter space, the realization settled fully, not as a moment of embarrassment, but as a shift in perspective that would not easily fade. Because that night had never been about who was allowed inside. It had been about understanding who never needed permission at all, and the difference between the two was something Daniel Brooks would never